Hey everybody, welcome back to our next episode of Infernal Intercourse with me and Pastor Brian.
Hello.
And today we want to talk about the character of Satan and why he is popular and where he came from. So we talked about the history of Satan a few episodes ago, but this is more just like the character of Satan. Because as we discussed in the other episodes, Satan doesn't really show up in the Bible too much in a sense. And when he does, it's not clear on if he's an individual or just any particular angel that God happens to be tasking with something that day. So as a person named Satan, there really isn't anything in the Bible so much. And originally in Christianity, the understanding of Satan as a person, when Satan became a name and not just a title, was that he was an angel, so he was beautiful like all the other angels. And even if he was cast out of hell, he still had that beauty. So it wasn't, I looked this up, it wasn't until Pope Gregory the Great, 590 to 604, who was apparently the first pope, at least, to say, hey, you know what, Satan isn't pretty, he's not beautiful, he is horned, he has hooves, he is dirty and lusty and filthy, and he's everything that's terrible. And people went off on it from there. So opening thoughts, Brian?
Well, it's interesting that you brought up Gregory the Great, because I just thought about this, that he's also the one that saw angels, right, from England, and said, yes, they're like angels. And so he sent Augustine of Canterbury to evangelize the Isles up there, because so he was definitely, Gregory the Great was an angel guy, but I guess that is all connected. It's funny when you talk about the biblical basis of it, and then how that evolved to Gregory, kind of to what developing where we go with it now. You know, we've talked about this before. It's like there's an Eastern image, there's a Western image, then there's the Jewish image, and then that all evolves to put kind of the Greco-Roman idea with, so that we get this image that really, I agree with you, like Gregory the Great's a great place to start, because we have pulled together different things and picked and chosen and ignored and thrown away things. And I think that this series does a great job of kind of balancing that. Like, I'm kind of critical at times about, but I think they wisely don't commit to any particular view, right? They've developed their own character a little bit, and they also play a little bit without ever giving us our assumed allusion to a certain image of Satan.
Yeah, so one of the things that the character of Satan has been, since at least Gregory, is basically the stock Wildman character. We see this right back to the beginning of literature, in the Epic of Gilgamesh. We have Enkidu, who is formed by the goddess to be basically a feral double, a dark twin of Gilgamesh. And of course, he's running with the animals, and he eats grass, and he drinks water at the lake, and he can't speak, and he's filthy because he hasn't bathed, and then he's very hairy, and then he gets tamed by the temple prostitute and brought back to Uruk, where he and Gilgamesh have a wrestling match, and when neither one of them wins, they decide they're going to be best bros forever, and they are until Enkidu dies after foretelling his death, because the Wildman has magical powers. So obviously the character is older than that, but here, even in the first piece of literature, is this stock character who is hairy, who lives with the animals, separated from human society. He may be naked, or he may just wear furs. He may have horns or not. He eats natural foods. In a sense, John the Baptist ends up being a little bit of a wild man, where he's living outside of civilization. He's eating only honey and wild locusts, and he's wearing skins. So
even in Beowulf, I'm trying to remember what's it called, Grendel, right?
Grendel, sure.
Yeah. So I mean, it is definitely primal there.
Often the wild man's associated with storms. Sometimes he can control the weather. Apparently, Pope Gregory thought Satan could control the weather, so that's just another tie-in. So there's a whole lot of these attributes that get then glommed on to Satan by Pope Gregory, because the wild man character is very popular. I mean, it's still popular today. What is Bigfoot, right? He's a hairy guy who lives outside of society, can't speak, and is this, this alien other that's out in the wilderness.
The
So,
Wolfmen in the Twilight series are way hotter than the vampires. Way hotter than the vampires.
so you have this character who just kind of gets reinvented by everybody over and over and over again, and yet they still have a lot of these same characteristics. In fact, in this book, which I make my students read several chapters of, Santa Claus Last of the Wildman, the author points out that really the connection between Santa Claus and the Wildman is much stronger than Santa Claus and St. Nicholas, in that he does speak, but he does wear furs, lives outside of society. He has some control over the weather. So he has a sooty face even, so he's still dirty. It's just happened to soot because he came down the chimney.
And to civilize him, a lot of Europe broke off Krampus, right? So that we could have a safe Santa Claus and take that wild man part of Santa and put it into Krampus.
Right, Krampus, or Black Pete in some places.
Yeah.
Which now has been reinterpreted as blackface. So I think Black Pete might be not long for this world because we're reinterpreting it. But originally he just would have been dirty because he doesn't bathe, and he's a wild man. So this all gets kind of glommed onto Satan after 590. In fact, I saw a quote in this book that kind of interested me. Apparently around the 1100s, the popes and the bishops decided, the people in their little villages are doing too much of this old like pagan fertility ritual stuff in the spring. We need to stomp on that. So let's do church plays instead. And apparently that went over like a lead balloon because all the characters were very,
pedantic,
disciplinary, and they're very like, you must do this, you must not do this, you must obey the church. And people are like, this is.
And they called them morality plays. I mean,
they just didn't interest people, and so apparently at some point, the church got wise to that and decided, we need to introduce another character, and that was when the sort of the buffoon comes in, but it's Satan, who now will leap on stage yelling, interestingly enough, ho ho ho, and is the stock now comic character who then turns into eventually like Punch and Judy, the Harlequin, the Jester.
Yeah, the Commedia dell'arte. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
So these things all come through history, but they include Satan, and so Satan has been this popular character, and even as a comic reliever buffoon character, which in a way our Lucifer is in this show. So.
Well, and it's interesting because even, the quintessential American heroes, of course, always have to, Mark Huckleberry Finn, right? It has to have that. And Mark Twain himself, right? It's that idea of the truth teller / the iconoclast, a little bit of know-nothingness. So still a little bit of that sauvage, right? Americans, United Staters particularly, really glom onto that still. It seems to be, I just don't know Eastern culture, at least Far Eastern culture as well. I don't know if they identify with it as much as European influenced West does. It's kind of interesting to think about that. But I love when you brought up Gilgamesh even. The most impressive biblical scholar professors I had in seminaries, they'll often say that one of the reasons the West fails to read the Bible in any reasonable context is because they underestimate how influential Gilgamesh was on all the generations that told the stories that were eventually written down. Of course, the generation that wrote the Bible down had just come back from Babylon. So there's all of that Middle Southern Asian influence of mythology that we tend to ignore, but yet we have adapted it and refined it to make it more manageable. Maybe that's part of it.
Yeah, so it is kind of interesting to look at the wild men in the Bible and how they pop up there too. Samson is another one who lives outside of society, is eventually tamed by a woman who cuts his hair, right? So he's less hairy, and now suddenly he's lost all his supernatural powers because he's in the city and he's living with a woman and he's not nearly so hairy. But at least
Esau.
But Samson then turns it around and like grows his hair back, gets his powers back, and and kills a bunch of people. But Esau is the hairy guy. You get the whole, as I said, John the Baptist thing, where he I don't know if he's a hairy or not, but he gets other attributes of the wild man.
And the trickster
just keep popping up.
Yeah, the trickster is the the hero, right, of at least Hebrew Bible stories, like the trickster, always, like all the way from Ehud, all the way down to Jacob, and that whole idea of the underdog who has to get by their wiles, right, to kind of outsmart the other person. Again, I'm not sure when that merges with the Wildman and when it splits, but that does seem to be always there. Again, and like I mentioned before, court jesters, this idea of the truth teller to me is connected to the Wildman. And probably because I studied post 1800 Brit Lit about the return of the savage with like Hardy and Bronte and all those, and I hated it studying it, but it actually is something very distinct and easy to see into Brit Lit, into US Lit from that. So,
well, certainly the character is being reinvented over and over. It's like humans are not going to let this character go. So clearly, the Wildman character, and as embodied in the Satan character, just has a hold on our imagination. And so the fact that shows like Lucifer come around is not really surprising. You just have to, I guess, some are more successful than others. This particular version of Satan has maybe a little bit less of some of these characteristics. He's not really dirty. He can speak, but he is compelled by lust a lot, which the Wildman generally is. And he's not really associated with storms or weather control in our story here. He does have some supernatural powers, but as you say, he is a truth teller, and he does make other people tell the truth. So,
it's interesting too, because of course he is a physically attractive man, and they talked about him originally trying to have an LA accent, but that you can get away with more naughtiness with a British accent, right? So it's a less off-putting bad boyness with the British accent. So it's kind of that combination. Again, the taming of the two seems to be more comfortable for us. Although, like I think about, as a gay man, many of us are attracted to the bad boys, or even in Latino culture, we talk about the chacales, the working man that, may or may not be receptive to the affection or the attraction of men, but certainly all of the women, like it's a very he-man thing. And I'm even curious about when hair is in our culture and when hair is out. And what is that a response to? Is it just trends, or is it a response to instability, or the need for truth-telling, or the need for a bad boy, or the need for a good boy? What is that all about?
There's an interesting point about the accent, because the ATMs around here, that for a little while they talked. They don't do it. So it would tell you to like insert the card or press in your pin, but it did it in a RP, received pronunciation accent, which is the BBC standard accent, if you don't know. And so I thought it really weird that my ATM spoke to me in this very BBC posh, in a sense, accent. It's like, why is my bank having its equipment speak to me with a British accent?
Well, why does Madonna speak that way?
I think in our culture that has more of sort of an air of authority, or just there's some kind of there's something that goes along with it that Americans are willing to kind of to let things go. And the other thing I wanted to bring up here was that we've been told about this particular version of Satan. He has more than one face, and he has a couple people, including Lucifer himself, have referred to this sort of satanic face or whatever as his devil face as his true face, which I always thought was kind of weird, because it was also established at some point that he never had that until he got cast into hell, which we don't really know how long ago that was. But if he didn't have that until he was made like warden of hell, then that doesn't seem like it would be his true face. But then what is any angel's true face? Because they're older than humanity, right? So they're created at the beginning of time when there are no humans, so they certainly wouldn't look human. So is any face a true face? And or all faces that an angel could put on would be a true face, because ultimately they're supernatural beings and not people. So
I had studied kabuki theater at one point, but I don't remember as much anymore. But I feel like there was like a demonic character there, and the makeup. I wonder where we get that image, like that when we see Lucifer have that face that reads to us as the devil, and I wonder where that comes from. In fact,
Some family from Pope Gregory.
yeah,
Well,
maybe. Yeah, I guess you're right with the horns and all that stuff. Maybe
yeah. So
because then I think of like Darth Maul, right, in Star Wars, right, like very clearly referencing horns and everything. So again, I love that you bring up the face, because to me angels are beings of light. Like that's just generally the definition that a lot of people would give for them in a lot of cultures. And then I was also fascinated in season 5, episode 1, to see, hell at work, and when they pulled the mask off that demon, he had no face, right? Like so, uh, it's
but I guess he
interesting,
didn't have a face in that particular hell booth,
right?
because he could be playing
He
somebody
didn't need
else.
it, yeah.
Yeah, he could be playing somebody else in a different hell booth.
And then the face goes to the body for me, right? So if the face is interchangeable or random, or why they're all good looking, right?
One would expect, I guess, angels would put on very pretty faces. But again, when we see Eve and she recognizes him somehow, maybe someone showed her a picture. I don't know, because it was Charlotte Richards in heaven who told her, yeah, Lucifer is hanging out in a nightclub in LA. That at least gets Eve going to LA, so she at least knows what city he's in. But you would think that when she met him in the garden, he would have been much shorter and looked like a Sumerian, because that's what she would expect a man to look like, right? A guy who's 6'3" and white doesn't, that would have been very exotic, or if not frightening, I would suppose, if you only live around 5 foot tall, brown people with black hair and dark eyes or something. It just, it would have been too alien maybe, but.
And if she wasn't a human, I'd think, well, maybe divine beings read each other's energy, even in a body. But she's just a human, right? So.
Yeah, so I guess he does recognize her first. He does say Eve, and then she turns around and says, oh, Lou, so maybe she didn't really know what he was going to look like, but she doesn't really seem to care what he looks like, and I guess that's fine. But I'm just.
And if you love Lucifer, looks.
What a real face is.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's easy to find Lucifer at a place named Looks, right, in LA. But so, I mean, maybe there was context that led her to it. It's just, I think that face question is fascinating, again, because it leads me to the whole body thing, which I've always found interesting in the way they do it here.
Yeah, because all our angels seem to have different colored wings. So so that seems to be like part of their being, is they all have slightly different, I don't know, that they're like composed of slightly different light or something. I don't know.
Even their manifestation,
that they just are slightly different colors.
Even their manifestation of their wings is weird, right? Like it doesn't, like it's a very earthly thing.
Yeah,
right?
like bird wings.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So even that, I mean, the whole thing that humans painted angels with wings on their backs, is that just something they've adapted or adopted because they really had wings, and so we just knew, or somebody whispered in their ear, hey, when you paint angels, you put wings on them because they have wings. But another thing you brought up then too, when we were discussing this earlier, is if angels don't really have true faces in a sense, including our Satan character, why does Satan's identical twin wear the same face? Who's deciding what they look like, right?
And what makes them twins, period, as an angel, right? Like that's just confusing.
Yeah, we had that discussion before. How can you have an identical twin when you were never born? But then how do you decide what you both look like? Is it, because assuming that Lucifer looked like a Sumerian man in the garden, then surely Michael looked like a Sumerian man too.
Well, and you bring up the fact that Lucifer's face that we see that it entertains the baby, one of my favorite things, is because of him being cast into hell. So then would Michael have that face in hell? No, right? So
we haven't seen Michael in hell, so we don't know, I guess. Yeah, I mean, certainly the Wildman is a big part of this, and then the bad boy needing to be redeemed also is a big part of this, right? So I'm not sure how long that character really has been popular, but it is popular now. Maybe the past century or so. I don't know. Is anybody really trying to redeem evil characters in Victorian times? I haven't studied that, so I don't know.
Well, and again, I think of, trying to think of like, yeah, well, like I'm trying to think of like when murderers or like Billy the Kid, or you know what I mean. Like I try and think of that kind of the populist hero who almost doesn't deserve redeeming, but or doesn't seek it, but gets it nonetheless. And I think we do have that in our culture.
50s on maybe kind of that romanticization of the anti-hero or something. I don't know.
It's fascinating because they don't mention Jesus, but of course Jesus is the Redeemer for Christians, right? And of course, redemption, redeeming has a whole meaning different from what we tend to think of it in substitutionary atonement theology, right? But all the way going back to that idea of your community ritualizes some person vouching for you to redeem you, right? And so if you look at Satan in that way, it's kind of interesting. Because Lucifer gets redeemed, it's interesting to me, by everybody who comes to Earth. Like nobody understands why he does this, and this is what's making Dad bad. But actually, he kind of converts them. But by their standing by him, it redeems him.
Yeah. So like M.Div has now chosen Lucifer over Dad, basically.
Yeah.
And so yeah, the whole redeemable thing, I'm not sure where that comes from. We do seem to be really into that these days. That nobody's can't be redeemed, I guess. And here we have this character who was supposed to be Satan, but of course we can't make him too evil, right? So every time someone asks him, "Did you torture people or did whatever?" and then he's like, "No, I just had to be the warden of the place." Yeah. So we don't want to think badly of our character, right? We don't want to think of him as the guy burning people at the stake or torturing people on the rack or something, because it's harder to sympathize with him, right? But at the same time, he's been overseeing that for a long time. So
yeah, that's my point. It's kind of bogus to let him be redeemed when the humans are trapped in their hell loops, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I'd like to see if they're not really trapped eventually, and maybe we can get them out of there. But any other thoughts on the bad boy or Satan?
Again, you and I have talked about these things and thought about these things for a long time, but new things come up, and I'm just now really toying with the idea of, and not to over personalize it, but I think this is part of what we're trying to see, which is just like when are bad boys attractive, and when are and when are posh boys attractive or not attractive for either. I think that's all part of this.
All right. Well, if you like this episode, hit like and subscribe and little bell notifications. When we put up more episodes, and I'm sure we'll be back with more things to say. In fact, we want to talk a little bit about queer theology in Lucifer coming up. Yes. So we'll talk about that coming up, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.